Our first scripture reading today is from Isaiah chapter 52, verses 7 through 12 in the NRSV Bible. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, "Your God reigns." Listen, your sentinels lift up their voices. Together they shout for joy. For in the plain sight they see the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth, shout together for joy. Who ruins of Jerusalem? For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm before the eyes of all the nation, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of God. Depart, depart, go out from there. Touch no unclean thing. Go out for the midst of it. Purify yourselves, you who carry the vessel of the Lord. For you shall not go out in haste, and you shall not go in flight. For the Lord will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your rear guard. The second scripture reading is from Romans chapter 10, verses 5 through 15. Moses writes concerning the righteousness that comes from the law, that the person who does these things will live by them. But the righteousness that comes from faith says, "Do not say in your heart, 'Who will ascend into heaven?' That is, to bring Christ down, or 'Who will descend into the abyss?' That is, to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raises him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart leading to righteousness, and one confesses with the mouth leading to salvation. The scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, and is generous to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are we to call on one whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring us good news.
Hello. My name is Jesse, and I've watched way too many movies in my time here on this earth. And I've always assumed that everyone enjoys movies, but I was talking to somebody last Friday about how I went to a movie theater and I watched The Odyssey and the new Spider-Man movie on the same day. Hey, it was 103 out, there's an air-conditioned place. But they said, I can't remember the last time I even went to a theater to see a movie. And I said, yeah, I don't blame you. It's getting expensive. I watch most of my movies on streaming. And they said, I don't watch movies at all. And I was shocked into silence when I heard that. And it never occurred to me that someone doesn't watch movies. And so I told Amber, my co-host for my radio show, about this because she and I had just done a movie review on our show. And she says, well, okay, so when was the last time you went to see a professional sporting event? And I said, when I was in San Francisco in 1989, I saw a Giants game. And she says, was it in Candlestick Park? And I was like, yeah, is that still not where they play? Oh, but I went to see a couple, I told her I went to see a couple of Chico Heat baseball games right after I moved here. And she said, they haven't been called the Heat since 2002. They're called the Outlaws. And I was like, oh, okay. And then she says, what was the last time you watched a professional sporting event on TV? And I had to admit that I haven't even watched the Super Bowl in about maybe 3 or 4 years. And the only reason I do that is because these days you can go to YouTube to watch the commercials and movie trailers from the halftime show, which is why I watch it in the first place, right? She says, not everybody watches movies. Point taken. And so that conversation that I had and the scripture that Georgia read this morning got me thinking about a genre of movie that I don't watch very often, and that is the Western. You already knew it. You like the Western. It's funny because there's exceptions to the rule. I like 3:10 to Yuma, Silverado, True Grit, both the 1961 and the one that was about 10 years ago or so. I wondered if it's listed here. She said Blazing Saddles, by the way, if you, that counts as a Western, but I've got it under comedy, ish. But I think maybe the biggest problem that I have with Westerns is that a lot of folks who are Western fans have bought into this myth that the American West was all this lawless frontier where bandits and criminals ruled the land. Imagine that, bandits and criminals that ruled the land. Good thing that doesn't happen anymore, But anyway, that's not true. There were plenty of laws in that time. It's just that in some places there weren't enough people to enforce the laws. Towns had charters. Even mining camps had their own constitutions. Sheriffs were elected. Everyone knew you needed laws. And the question is whether people would honor those laws. When they didn't, that's when things fell apart. So yeah, America has never really been a lawless nation. We've always had laws, and we keep making more laws. And it's not that we have too few laws, it's that we have too few transformed hearts. Okay? We've only been a nation now for 250 years. This year we celebrated our 250th year. We are young compared to many larger nations in the world today. By the time that Paul wrote this book that Georgia read from, Rome had been shaping the Mediterranean world for 700 years. And the Israelites had been living under God's law for much longer than that. And yet every one of these societies, American, Roman, Jewish, they all discovered the same thing, and that is you cannot legislate people into living a fuller, richer, and more loving life. In other words, you can't legislate morality. Sure, you can outlaw murder, but you can't require forgiveness. You can punish theft, but you can't create generosity. You can require equal treatment, but you can't manufacture empathy or compassion. And this is the point that Paul is trying to make to the churches in Rome. Israel had commandments. They already had commandments. They had the law of Moses, but they lacked transformed hearts. And a lot of folks misunderstand Romans 10 because they think it's about abolishing the law. But that isn't the point. Romans 10 is not about abolishing the law. It is about changing where righteousness comes from. So what does this actually look like in real life? Well, the law says, do this and live. Grace says, Christ fulfilled this, trust him and live. And these are radically different starting points when we're talking about law. One begins with performance, and the other begins with relationship. America is having the same argument that Israel had. We all think the solution to our problems is to come up with the right laws. We start our sentences with, well, if only Congress would, or only the Supreme Court would, fill in the blank, and whatever you think is what they ought to be doing. And, we do it more locally, too. We think, oh, if only Sacramento will whatever. If only City Hall, if only the school board would do this. Oh, and here's my favorite. If only those people. I think Paul would say, I think you're missing the point here. The problem isn't legal. The problem's spiritual. And before you think spiritual is just another word for religious, that's not what I mean. Spirituality, and we're talking spiritually speaking, broken people write broken laws. Okay? Broken people find loopholes. Broken people divide themselves up into tribes. Laws do matter. Paul is not anti-law, but he knows that law cannot create the righteousness that it requires. So let's take a look at this little section in verse 9 through 13 again. Paul writes, because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart and so is justified, and one confesses with the mouth and so is saved. The scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all and is generous to all who call on him. Notice how simply Paul presents the concept of salvation. It's not know enough, or be Jewish enough, or behave enough, or understand enough, vote correctly, attend church regularly. No. He says, if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart, that's it. And it applies to everyone, Jew, Greek, insiders, outsiders, religious, non-religious, even SB&Rs, spiritual but not religious. The wall has come down. I like the way the translators rendered verse 12 by using this phrase. There is no distinction. Now that would have shocked anyone in Paul's time and place. Sometimes we just breeze past it without thinking about it. But Paul's readers would not have overlooked it. This isn't about personal salvation like folks insist it is. It's about who gets to belong. Grace tears down every dividing wall that we've ever built. It speaks directly to our moment. Not by pretending that differences don't exist, because believe me, they do, right? None of those distinctions is more important than the one thing we hold in common. We belong to Christ. But then Paul, he pivots hard over here in verse 14 and 15. He says, but how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news, which is the last part of the first scripture that Georgia read from Isaiah. People can't believe unless they've heard. See, grace was never meant to stop with us. And the church isn't just the place you go to receive grace. It's the place from which grace is carried. For 250 years, America has been trying to become a more perfect union. Christians have been invited to do something even greater than that. We're not supposed to build a perfect nation by passing laws that force our beliefs on others. Christ's followers are more interested in working towards reconciliation, reconciling the whole of humanity. Or at least that's what we should be doing. Legislation has its place, but reconciliation begins somewhere much deeper. And we don't do this by passing more laws. We do this by being living witnesses to grace. We do this by crossing barriers and treating every person as someone for whom Christ died. But we keep thinking that if we can just elect the right people, write the right laws, create the right systems, that we will finally be able to fix all these things that we think are broken. Paul affirms that laws matter. Again, he's not anti-law. Laws restrain evil. They create order. They are necessary, but they cannot heal what is broken inside of us. That's why Romans 10 points us away from achievement and towards grace. Away from earning towards trusting. Away from dividing people towards inviting everyone. The law can define righteousness, but only Christ can create it.